In Afghanistan, even dogs are addicted. That's not a joke. It's the chilling account of a former doctor in Kabul where stray animals scavenging in landfills have been exposed to illicit substances enough to tremble from withdrawal. But when humans become dependent on these substances, they aren't treated. They're rounded up, dragged from under bridges, gathered, crammed into vehicles, and taken to rehabilitation centers where there are no painkillers, only cold. Cement hunger, thirst, and forced prayers. Their recovery isn't about living a better life. It's about transforming into someone else, silent, submissive, obedient. This isn't just a rehabilitation camp. This is a mental prison, and the authorities call it the Taliban returns. Purification or eradication of human identity. In August of 2021, the world witnessed a historical reversal. The Taliban, an Islamic force once overthrown, officially returned to power in Afghanistan after 2 decades of conflict. In the eyes of many international communities, they are leaders with a conservative ideology. But in how they see themselves, they are the embodiment of a pure Islamic state. Immediately upon taking power, the new government not only changed the leadership apparatus, but also redefined the most fundamental aspects of people's lives, from dress code education to even the definition of recovery. One of their strongest declarations was to cleanse the territory of illicit substances as a sacred mission. They view these substances as things that weaken the spirit, as manifestations of moral decay that need to be purified, not through medical means, but through strict discipline. For this reason, thousands of people dependent on illicit substances at the bottom of society, who should ideally be supported, became targets of Roundup campaigns. No tests, no paperwork. Just a stumbling gait or cloudy eyes were enough to be labeled heroin or meth and forcibly taken to centers. The government does not hide this. They openly state that rehabilitation is part of building a new human being. And for them, rehabilitation is not about healing the body, but about subjugating the spirit. They want to turn hardship into submission, a silent, resigned obedience without resistance. But behind the declaration of eliminating illicit substances, there are unanswered questions. What is truly being purified of social problems or human identity itself? And if dependence is a wound that needs healing, can punishment truly replace compassion? Widespread drug crisis. To understand why the authorities chose illicit substances as one of the urgent issues to address, one needs to look at Afghanistan's turbulent history. For decades, this country has not only been a battlefield between factions, but also the world's largest opium producer. At one point, over 90% of the global supply originated from the sprawling poppy fields in Afghanistan. But behind that enormous figure are human tragedies. 40 years of continuous conflict have left not only ruined cities and displaced families, but also psychological wounds that are difficult to heal. In the shadows of poverty, unemployment, and loss, over 3.5 million Afghans fell into the cycle of drug dependence. Not just adult men, but women and even children are caught in this vicious cycle. For many, illicit substances are not simply a means of escape. They become a spiritual refuge, a way to temporarily forget the cold of winter, without blankets to forget the pain of losing loved ones, or to temporarily soothe the desperation when each day passes without work, without a future. This gives the problem of drug dependence in Afghanistan a special character. It is not just a medical issue, but a deeply rooted social crisis. When conflict steals hope, illicit substances creep in like a false remedy, leading people into illusion instead of healing real pain. Today, as the government declares to cleanse the territory of illicit substances, they face a harsh reality dependence. In Afghanistan is not just a consequence of growing and trafficking drugs, but also a legacy of decades of instability, poverty, and despair. Instead of a medical and social support approach, the authorities chose a tougher method, going into the streets, rounding up, and taking drug-dependent individuals from neighborhoods to centers. And from here, another story begins, where the line between support and discipline becomes blurrier than ever. Kabul holds its breath. The Roundup campaign. Before dawn, Kabul holds its breath. The impoverished alleys where drug-dependent individuals huddle under ragged blankets become the destination for convoys of pickup trucks. Gunshots rip through the night sky. Some jolt awake. Before they can even understand what's happening, they are taken away. There are no arrest warrants, no questions asked. Just an emaciated body, dull eyes, enough to be deemed in need of rehabilitation. Some have just collapsed after a long night, a dirty water bottle still in hand as a pillow. Others merely stand there looking for family members and are also put into vehicles. They don't cry out, just hang their heads as if they have accepted their fate. In that moment, the entire street is silent, a silence of fear, a silence of witnesses who dare not intervene. A 14-year-old boy is taken along with older men. His mother wails on the roadside, but no one looks back. In Afghanistan today, sometimes compassion is seen as a weakness, and hardship means one needs to change. In the eyes of the authorities, these campaigns are a way to cleanse society's proof of their strong will. But for the people being loaded onto those trucks, it's the beginning of a journey of deprivation, loss of freedom, loss of identity, and even loss of the chance to be seen as a human being. Instead of receiving the care of a doctor, the comfort of a social worker, they only receive control and suspicious glances. Where understanding should be, there is only anxiety. And in this war, illicit substances are no longer condemned. The real issue is the presence of difficult lives, those considered a burden on society. Then all of them will be taken to a place called a rehabilitation center. But in reality, it's an environment where recovery means losing one's name, losing one's voice, and sometimes losing oneself. Phoenix Rebirth, or Earthly Hell Phoenix, a name that sounds like a promise of rebirth. But in Kabul, Phoenix is a place many describe with two words: torment. This center was once a U.S. military base, now transformed into a massive facility with 1,000 beds. On paper, it's a place of recovery. But in reality, it resembles a detention center more than anything else. Stepping through the camp gate, newcomers are immediately stripped of all traces of their old lives. Clothes are burned, hair is shaved, beards are shaven clean. No name, no past. They are only called by what has become associated with them: heroin, meth, opium. Humans seem to disappear, leaving only the label of their dependence. They are led into cold rooms where the cement floor is their bed, and there is nothing but a ragged mat. No painkillers, no doctors, not a single hand placed on a shoulder to comfort. Instead, there is the agony of 15 days of cold turkey, vomiting convulsions, cold sweats, and hoarse groans throughout the night. Meals are just a bowl of white rice, a dry piece of bread. Enough to survive, but not enough to regain health. One person trembles gnawing at each grain of rice, another shares a small piece of bread with a roommate. In adversity, sometimes they are each other's only support for people society deems in need of change. Yet they offer each other what little humanity remains. Discipline here is as strict as in the military. Every day, they must line up, march, and pray on time, no matter how exhausted their bodies are. Some try to believe that faith will help them overcome. But for many others, it's just forced compliance, a way to survive another day. Phoenix is not like a hospital because there is no medical healing here. It's not quite a prison either because there are no official charges. Phoenix is a murky void where the body is held but the spirit is eroded day by day. When prayer replaces painkillers. The first few days at Phoenix are called the detox phase, but for those inside it's simply 15 challenging days. No painkillers, no doctors, no substitute medication to alleviate the dependence. Just a trembling body on a cement floor, a rumbling stomach, and long sleepless nights. The meager meals, white rice, dry bread, are not enough to sustain their strength. One person collapses from exhaustion, another falls into convulsions. At times, they hold hands not to fight the agony, but just to remind each other that they are still human. But in Phoenix, weakness is not allowed. Instead of being cared for, they are required to pray 5 times a day on time, regardless of whether their bodies are trembling or they can't stand. Anyone who disobeys anyone who screams in panic or delirium will be taken to solitary confinement, called the Spiritual Reintegration Room. There, darkness and silence become the only medicine. In the government's view, illicit substances are a problem to be solved, while hardship is an opportunity for purification. Hardship is purification. Discipline is healing. That's how they explain everything. But for those inside, prayer doesn't soothe the spasms. The Quran doesn't replace a nurse's hand or a pill to stop the trembling. Some whisper prayers with dry, cracked lips, not because they find faith, but because they know if they stop, they will be disciplined. Faith here is not a choice, but a command. During those 15 days, many could no longer distinguish whether they were being supported or being rehabilitated. Pain, hunger, discipline, all wrapped in a religious veneer. But the most alarming thing is not the pain, but the erosion of self. When a person is no longer called by their name, no longer treated as a patient, what is left to hold them but submission? Afghan. Women, their presence restricted. If drug-dependent individuals are imprisoned in rehabilitation centers, then Afghan women are living within an invisible framework that permeates society. After the government returned what they call religious laws, have reshaped the lives of women. Schools for high school girls are closed. Girls as young as 12 or 13, who had just gotten used to blackboards and chalk, are suddenly forced to stop, as if their dreams of education were a luxury. In many cities, women are forbidden from working, forbidden from appearing in public without a male escort. Their opportunities for independence, for them to speak their own voices, are locked behind closed doors. On the streets of Kabul, billboards that once featured women are now painted over in black. Faces disappear from public spaces, leaving a world devoid of women, as if half the population has had its presence restricted. Some women have taken to the streets to protest. They carry banners, chant slogans demanding the right to education, the right to work. But these protests are quickly suppressed. Rubber bullets, batons, and shouts have forced many to retreat, and now they can only continue to resist from within their own homes. Handwritten banners hidden behind curtains, silent appeals sent through social media or in secret meetings. But this very silence reflects a larger reality, a society that has deliberately limited the presence of women. No more classrooms filled with laughter, no more shops where women independently traded, no more images of mothers taking their children to school. Only slow-moving figures shrouded in fabric walking beside a man like their own shadows. While the government calls it safety and religious respect, for many Afghan women, it is a limitation. Not because they abandoned society, but because society actively restricted them from the map of life. the scourge of violence in shelters in the shadows. In Afghanistan, human rights. Watch statistics are chillingly haunting. 87% of women have experienced at least one instance of violence in their lives, from physical, emotional, to sexual. But that number is just the tip of the iceberg. Behind it are countless invisible faces, untold stories, their mouths long sealed by fear. Fatima is one such story. She married too young, was severely abused by her first husband, requiring multiple hospitalizations. When he abandoned her for another wife, her family forced Fatima to remarry. And then the tragedy continued. Her ex-husband returned, accused her of misconduct, and the court issued a verdict: death by stoning. A chilling sentence for a woman who had lived her entire life in a spiral of violence. Fatima was lucky to escape death thanks to a female judge's intervention, but not everyone gets such a chance. In the shadows of silence and fear, there are individuals trying to fight back. Mahbouba, a women's rights activist, runs a secret shelter for abused women. Their wives abused by their husbands, young girls fleeing forced marriages, victims of abuse. Find a glimmer of light. Mahbouba knows she is risking her life. In a society where many consider shelters to be nests of social problems, helping women escape means confronting both the community and the authorities. Yet every day, Mahbouba still opens her doors, still hides, still embraces the tears of those who seek refuge. Because she believes that if they remain silent, these women will struggle to find a way out, both physically and mentally. In a country where women are restricted from public life, such shelters become the last breath of hope. But they are always fragile, always on the verge of being shut down. And when those doors close, thousands of other Fatimas will have nowhere to seek help. Millions of Afghan girls denied the right to education. If adult women are forced to live behind closed doors, then the girls of Afghanistan are deprived even of the door that leads to their future. After the Taliban returned to power in 2021, one of their first shocking decisions was to shut down all secondary schools for girls above grade 6. The hallways that once echoed with laughter are now silent. The blackboards and chalk remain, but the seats are empty. In Kabul, Herat, or Kandahar, every morning young girls put on their uniforms, pack their school bags, only to sit quietly at home, watching their brothers or male classmates walk off to school. Dreams of becoming a doctor, a teacher, or simply continuing to read and write have suddenly become unreachable. Meanwhile, religious schools for boys' madrasas are rapidly expanding. Thousands of boys sit shoulder to shoulder reciting the Quran for hours each day. The authorities call this the future of the nation, a generation of obedient men unquestioningly devout. But for society at large, it is a future that is incomplete, where half of the population is excluded from knowledge. At centers like Asiana, once safe havens for orphans and poor children, the number of girls has drastically declined. Teachers admit their helplessness as they watch students disappear one by one, forbidden by orders from above to return. A 13-year-old girl whispered to a reporter, "I just want to go to school. I don't want to be married off early. I want to have a future." The education crisis, coupled with a humanitarian one, forces many families into unbearable choices, marrying off, or even selling daughters just to survive. When children are torn away from school, they lose not only literacy, but also the chance to break free from the cycle of poverty and injustice. When an entire generation is barred from learning, the loss is not just knowledge, it is hope. Lost dreams erased, and the very ability to change their destiny stripped away. Instead of moving forward, Afghanistan is being pushed back into its darkest days. The recovery stage and the hidden truth. In the eyes of Afghanistan's state media, rehabilitation centers are portrayed as a success story. Cameras pan across neat rows of people heads shaved, wearing clean uniforms. They mumble prayers, eyes cast down, silent, as if they have found salvation. For the authorities, this is proof that discipline has healed, that they have controlled the drug problem. But the camera lens only captures a staged facade. The reality behind it is quite different. These people are not recovering. They are participating in a pre-written script. They lose their voices after long days of forced silence. They lose their emotions after being disciplined for crying out in pain or lamenting. They lose themselves when called by nicknames related to illicit substances instead of their real names. Some recount that when the cameras were on them, they were asked to smile or recite prayers loudly, as if it were evidence of faith and change. But when the lens turned off, the smile disappeared, leaving only empty eyes. No one filmed the nights they convulsed on the cement floor, the meals with only a few grains of rice, or the desperate whispers among those in the same situation. This so-called recovery doesn't stem from medical care nor from psychological therapy. It comes from fear. Fear of being disciplined. Fear of isolation. Fear of being seen as an opponent. People learn to obey, to remain silent, to stand in line. And then, this very compliance is filmed as success, presented as evidence for the whole world to see. The truth is manipulated to serve political purposes, because in a society where power is built on control, what matters is not whether you truly recover, but whether you appear to recover before the camera. And so rehabilitation centers, which already resembled detention facilities, now become a stage where people are forced to play the role of the saved, while the real pain is hidden in the shadows. Sons of Reverend, that shows the rehabilitation camp. Returning to where hell began, the day of freedom arrives, but it doesn't feel like a new beginning. After 45 days, those who leave the camp gates have only a bag of dry bread, a thin shirt, and nothing else. No papers, no support plan, no path back to social life. They leave like shadows, thin, shaven-headed, hollow-eyed, standing, lost in a city that had already turned its back on them long ago. Many have no home to return to. Their families were lost in conflict or had abandoned them beforehand. Some return to the very places where they were rounded up under bridges, landfills, impoverished alleys, reeking of illicit substances. No one awaits them, and there are no jobs for them. And so, with just one moment of weakness, drug use recurs. The cycle of relapse begins. Some bitterly admit that at least in the camp they had food every day, a place to lie down, and companions to share their hardship with. Outside, amidst a Kabul ridden with poverty and unemployment, they don't even have that. That's why some intentionally violate rules to be taken back to the camp, where despite the harshness, it's still less cruel than the hunger on the streets. The question arises, is this truly recovery? Or just a closed loop of subjugation into the camp, endure hardship out of the camp, relapse, and back into the camp again? No vocational counseling, no reintegration programs, no hope of rebuilding their lives. Only fear and emptiness cling to them like ghosts. In the eyes of the authorities, a person who stops trembling and bows their head in prayer is already a success. But in the eyes of those who have experienced it, it's just an invisible suspended sentence. At any time, they can fall back into the old cycle. And Afghanistan, instead of healing the souls shattered by conflict and poverty, is pushing them into an endless cycle of hardship. Afghanistan today is not just a war on drugs, it's a war against the most vulnerable lives. Addicts are handcuffed and called sinners. Women are erased from public life. Children are deprived of their right to education. All are gradually disappearing under a regime that claims to bring peace. In the cold rehabilitation camps, submission is called recovery, and pain is disguised as purification. But when human rights and compassion are absent, it's not healing, it's subjugation. Is there any other path beyond silence and pain for these fates? And you, how do you feel about this story? Please subscribe to the NVL Travel Documentary channel and leave your thoughts below.